that have an area of transmission of anywhere from 100 miles to 250 miles. That's a very, very specific and local thing, which means that what does that do? That generates local need for local production. And meaning that in some ways, that's a way of doing your own thing rather than always counting on either CNN or the CBS or ABC to do your job for you. So that's really interesting. Computers therefore circumscribe television itself. Now, one of the big laws that McLuhan taught me to understand in terms of art and technology is when a medium is in full force, it cannot be art. In other words, the medium is at the outer edge of people's experience and it cannot be manipulated. It cannot be controlled sufficiently to be manipulated as an art form. But the moment a medium is surrounded by another one, the moment another medium that takes over and controls it, surrounds it, it turns the previous one into an art form. Which means that television now, or video, can benefit from this control that computers have put onto it to become a full-fledged art form. But the moment a medium is surrounded by another one, the moment another medium that takes over and controls it, surrounds it, it turns the previous one into an art form. Which means that television now, or video, can benefit from this control that computers have put onto it to become a full-fledged art form. You may say, well, of course, in the 60s, video art began. Andrew Pike starts that. People go out with their photo pack, they had black and white quarter-inch tape with their photo pack, and they would start to do art things. But they had absolutely zero distribution. It was purely a kind of confidential art. And it never got to the material point. Now that anybody can buy a camera like this for under $600 and start doing their home movie and figure out that maybe they have more time to do something better than a home movie, can actually institute himself or herself an artist, up to a point. There's all kinds of possibilities even from a single small camera. So you can imagine that this is part of the whole development. Now, the psychological side I haven't touched about. The technical side is computers turn TV into material for art because it makes it more manageable and more maneuverable. On the psychological side, you also need a change. Devoted and dedicated artists would find it more difficult if there was not some support in the community for embarking in art forms for which there is no funding agency, and certainly in the States there is less funding agencies than there are in Canada, or for which there is no real audience. I have recently been part of a jury of arts and technology at the Canada Council and realized that they are still dealing with definitions, even they, which are in charge of finding what are the meaning of this or that art form and how. And they're very good, they're wonderful people, but they are looking at the definition of an art form because it still hasn't been clearly separated from the video production, film production, performing art production, installation production. There's a whole problem there in sorting out the meaning of this. So psychologically, a need for a change of perception in the society, starting with people who are interested in art, has to begin. And so what has happened? Well, a global possibility of change occurs even from a simple and most apparently innocuous technology as the zapper. What do zapper teach us? The zappers came in the late, after 76, 77 or so, electronic zappers, which enable you to change channel at a distance. It's a primary course in editing. That's what a zapper is. Basically, you zip from one channel to another because you basically are editing. It's not that you are an editor because you learn to zap from one channel to the other, but you are getting the editing sensibility. Suddenly when somebody tells you, editing is a very important function of film production, like my students, I have film students, and I teach them all kinds of functions of film. And I can remember 15 years when I said that editing was one of the most important functions of film, when my students were taking, the role. I had little teams, and I had one which was a director and a sound taker and cameraman and whatnot, scriptwriter or whatever. And I said, well, there's also editing. Oh, yeah, well, who cares? Now if I say, what function do you want? The first thing that's taken is editing, because editing is the most exciting part of the job. So there must have been a change, right? So I think that's what it is. The zapping functions as our course in editing. Video recording and playback was our intermediate course to the effect of production. Indeed. Editing is one thing, but when you do video recording and playback, when you can time your recording of that show that you wanted to see but you couldn't be there, you basically are beginning to see your own tape as a product, as a production. you have control over a product and you can bring it out of the machine, put it back into the machine, store it, label it, it's your thing. Not to mention that it's also a rip-off of the system so that you are happy because you've taken, we learned that with audio cassettes a long time ago. Number 3, there is the lightweight technology that makes people, gives people access to the actual hands-on work, which is very, very important. You really need this concrete contact with the medium itself in order to begin to develop a sensibility for it. So what I'm saying is that with all these effects, we are gradually going to see not only a greater number of artists interested in video, but a greater number of people who suddenly think, well, wait a minute, these guys who are doing these incomprehensible tapes must somehow, sometime mean something, and let me give them a try. And that's what I'm saying is going to happen within the next 5-6 years. I know you have to be patient. Okay, can I skip this? I guess I can. What I can do is, I'll read that and then I can skip the rest in a faster way. In such a context, video can clearly be understood as a necessary step of individuation in the medium's penetration of the social body. Remember, I began this whole presentation by talking about the collectivization of the psychology of the imagination via television. That's a normal step in the way these things happen. But what you need is individuation. Therefore, the role of the artist is fundamental. When the printing press was developed, the first books that were published were collected books. There was the Bible, many versions of the Bible. And there were legal texts, and there were things that were addressed to the collected people. The printing press was certainly not devoted to novels, or to plays, or to poetry, at first. But very quickly, what used to be the most important affair of the printing, the most important content of the printing press became the secondary thing, and the most important became the individual expression. That's where I say the role of the artist is fundamental. Why? Because poetry, novels, and plays written by people who are exploring the experience of having a personal psychology for the first time. For the first time, you have to remember that the printing press was in private psychology. Before that, you really had a minimal ego and a maximal relationship with the tribe or the group or the religious community or your social state, whether you were from aristocracy or tiers d'état or whatever. It's only through this contact with a personal reading material that you develop a personal psychology. And I'll explain that later. So that's an individuation process which is brought in by the artist. By way of comparison of this television individuation, one can propose that even as writing first appeared on the walls of the city, lighter writing material soon allowed for individual access, and the subsequent ensuing and consequent development of democracy. Democracy was created by the Greeks. You've heard about democracy recently on TV. It was created by the Greeks after the invention of the alphabet, and it's totally dependent on it. The video camera is about to become an electronic pen, a democratic system, but it's precisely at this juncture that a revamping of our concepts and perceptions about the medium and its functions is necessary. Indeed, computers bring something more to video, which is the possibility to interact with the screen. Hence, the system that I want to demonstrate as a kind of an illustration of what I'm talking about. At this point, we are still only interacting with the local screen in a closed-circuit situation. But interactive video technologies are fast exploring the technical feasibility of interacting with broadcast TV as well. This interactivity I oppose to the dominant model of information processing of the book world, which is representations. I find the dominant model of information processing with the electronic world is interactivity. That weird, very garbage can-like word which contains so many possible definitions, and we won't go through them all. We won't even go through one of them. I simply say, you know what I mean by interactivity, the fact, and I'll show you. I'll show you what interactivity is now, technically. But I want to say, and this is really coming